Arizal writes that Rabbi Arizal once said to one of his Talmidim that a Yid who's careful to limit himself when it comes to seeking money and seeking wealth, and the person holds back and doesn't do business with more money than they have, they don't go out to borrow money for doing business, but rather the person does business only with their own money, and they limit it to whatever their funds are. A person knows that they can go out and borrow $100,000, $150,000, and be able to do big business with it. And the person themselves only has, let's say, $10,000 to invest for business purposes. And the person sticks to what their own money is. They're not willing to go out of that boundary. Rabbi Arizal says that by doing that, a person is actually mekayim one of the outstanding mitzvahs of the Torah. We find that in the Kriya Shema, Hashem says to Bnei Yisrael, "V'yohavta es Hashem alekecha," that we're required to love Hashem b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol mi'odecha, with our heart, with our soul, and with all of our wealth. V'chol mo'edecha refers to a person's money. Rabbi Arizal says that when it says that a person is supposed to love Hashem with all of his money, how is he mekayim that mitzvah? That refers to this specific situation, where a person has an opportunity to do business using all of his own money, or using more than that, using some of somebody else's money to do business. And the person chooses not to. They say that whatever Hashem gave me, that's what Hashem wants me to use to earn a living with. I'm not willing to go with more than that. Rabbi Arizal says that this is called being mekayim, this inyan of b'chol mi'odecha, serving Hashem with all of your money, by not going out to use more than what's yours. This is one item. And Rav Nosson says, regarding this inyan of b'chol mi'odecha, Rabbi Arizal also said to another one of his Talmidim, that when a Yid is zoiche to give a chomesh to tzedakah from their money, that's how a person is zoiche to be mekayim uv'chol mi'odecha. We know that the Shulchan Aruch tells us that each and every single Jew who observes Torah and mitzvahs is required to take 10% from whatever they earn, any profit that they make, any gift that they receive, and give that away to tzedakah. This is an obligation. This is not kindness. This is the basic requirement for being Jewish. Hashem says that Hashem wants to be partners with a Jew in whatever they acquire. The partnership is such that Hashem is willing to settle for the Yid keeping 9 and Hashem getting 1 out of 10. And the Gemara says that if a Jew lives in this way, Hashem puts a bracha into the person's earning, into the person's efforts, that the person is successful. If not, Hashem says, if you're not willing to stick to these rules of the partnership, then we'll go the reverse. Hashem says, I'll take 9/10 and I'll leave you the meiser. I'll only give you 1/10 of what you were really supposed to get in terms of parnosa. That's the chiyuv. That's Hebrew law. Rabbi Arizal said if a person wants to show that they're serving Hashem with all their wealth, which means being extra religious, that being extra religious is when a person is zoiche to give 2/10, a fifth of their money, meiser, to tzedakah. And we find that there were a few of Rabbi Arizal's Talmidim that was zoiche to carry this out, that was zoiche actually to give double what was considered standard or normal in terms of tzedakah. The next paragraph, Reish Tzadik, 290, Rav Nosson says that I heard people say over in Rabbi Arizal's name that great tzadikim, when they speak divrei Torah, in the words that they speak are included everything that the entire Klal Yisrael needs. We know that the Zohar HaKodesh says that when we talk about Hashem giving shefa to the world, Hashem providing sustenance to the world, there is a pipeline through which this shefa comes. That pipeline is the tzadik. Me'ha'oichel yotzo ma'achol. The Zohar HaKodesh darshans one of the riddles that's brought in Tanakh that was said during the time of Shimshon HaGibor, that from that which eats came forth something which was eaten. And the Zohar HaKodesh interprets that statement to refer to an oichel is a tzadik. The posek says, tzadik oichel l'soiv hanafshoi, that a tzadik eats for the benefit of his neshama. He doesn't eat to get physical pleasure from what he's eating, but he eats to sustain the neshama, to tie together the neshama and guf. That's the oichel, the tzadik. Mei ha'oichel yotzo meichel. All the meichel, all the sustenance for the world comes via the oichel, via the tzadik. Rabbi Arizal says, when does this take place? When a tzaddik teaches Torah to Bnei Yisrael, when he gives of his Torah, he's actually being mashpia to Bnei Yisrael. Together with his diburim of Torah, he actually distributes to each person everything that they need, beruchnius and begashmius. And therefore, Rabbi Arizal says, when he speaks, he does it in such a way where each and every single person receives everything that they need individually. Rabbi Arizal says that this is hinted to in a posek in Chumash. The posek says, Eile hadvorim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the entire Am Yisrael. Now the question is, in those days they didn't have speakers, electronic speakers, where Moshe Rabbeinu could speak at one time where all 600,000 Jews would hear him. So obviously that's not what this posek is referring to. But rather Rabbi Arizal says this means that when Moshe Rabbeinu spoke, from his words there emanated what was needed for the entire Klal Yisrael. Each and every single Yid that listened to Moshe Rabbeinu speaking was able to receive exactly what they needed, both beruchnius. Each and every person received the advice that they needed. There are many stories written about Rabbi Arizal that people would come to his shir, and in his shiurim were included advice that dealt with each and every single person's particular situation. There would be an incident that would come up that a person would have a problem, a financial problem, a health problem, a decision that they needed to make, and the person didn't know what direction to go, and the person didn't get a chance to present this question privately to Rabbi Arizal, and Rabbi Arizal would give a shir on Shabbos or on Yontif or whenever it was, and the person found that automatically by listening to the shir, by coincidence, seeming coincidence, in Rabbi Arizal's shir was included the question, the answer, plus anything else they needed to know related to that subject. And obviously this was not coincidence. This is part of the ruach of kedusha that tzaddikim possess, that their words, the divrei Torah that they speak, they don't get it from their brains. They don't get it just from their learning. A tzaddik, when he speaks, he asks Hashem to give him words to speak. Just as we say in the introduction to Shemon Esrei, Hashem sefosai tiftoch, ufi yagiti losecha, Hashem, please open my lips and let me speak your praises. And what we're implying there is we're asking Hashem to be mekayim the posek v'osim devorai beficha. The posek says, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I will place my words in your mouth. I will give you what to say. Hashem kaviyochel will take the actual words, put them in the tzaddik's mouth for the tzaddik to know exactly what to say. And this is where people that were privileged to partake from Rabbi Arizal's shiurim or from the shiurim of other tzaddikim was able to witness this seeming miracle where in their learning was contained actual practical advice that was specifically needed for them. The next paragraph, Reish Tzadik Aleph, 291, Rav Nosson says, I found a certain item that wasn't published in the Likutei Moharan. It was left out from the edition of the Likutei Moharan that we have, and yet this was something that was originally included in Rabbi Arizal's shiurim. And this is the item. Rabbi Arizal said, you should know that in each and every single generation, there are new sicknesses that are introduced to the world. Sicknesses that didn't exist before in the world, brand new, coming into the world. And this is based on the posek, Yosef das, Yosef machoiv. The posek says that the more wisdom that there is, the more suffering, the more pain and suffering that there is. Implying that because of the fact that in each and every single generation, Hashem puts into the mind of scientists or other people to introduce new chachmos to the world, new inventions to the world, new different types of energy, solar energy, different types of machinery, airplane, ships, new technologies, computers, videos, different things that are brand new chachmos that are being introduced into the world. Whenever there's new das, there's automatically new mach'oivos, new types of suffering also, and specifically illnesses that are introduced to the world. And Rabbi Arizal concluded with the words, Hashem yatzilenu. May Hashem protect us from chas v'sholem having any of these illnesses attach themselves to us. But it's interesting to note that as we watch the history of the world unfold and the current events, and we know that there are sicknesses that are being spoken about today that are very popular, Rachmana litzlan, and yet years ago it was just about unheard of. And it seems that this is a new type of bruch that came to the world. And in fact, Rabbi Arizal says you should know it is because these two items travel together. A new revelation of das automatically implies new suffering also, Rachmana litzlan. The next paragraph, Reish Tzadik Beis, Rav Nosson speaks and tells a story about one of his friends, one of Rabbi Arizal's Talmidim. In order to give an introduction to this story, we're going to go to the Sefer Koich Ve'or that discusses how many of Rabbi Arizal's Talmidim first met him and how they became close to him. And these are some of the most outstanding stories in the heritage of Breslov, in the heritage of Rabbi Arizal, to see exactly how his Talmidim acted towards him, how he acted toward them, and what made them so unique. And by coincidence again, we mentioned earlier the issue of chaimish, a person giving a fifth of their earnings to tzedakah, that's how a person is zeichet to be mekayim uvechol mi'edecha. And here, Rabbi Arizal, in this paragraph, Reish Tzadik Beis, we have one of the stories related to Rabbi Yudel Zal. Rabbi Yudel was one of Rabbi Arizal's great Talmidim. And as we said, we're going to give a little bit of an introduction to describe how this person came to Rabbi Arizal. This Rabbi Yudel had a close friend and a student whose name was Reb Doiv, who lived in the city of Chigrin, which was one of the large cities of Talmidei Chachamim in Russia. This Reb Doiv was a businessman, and this Reb Doiv, Rabbi Arizal, instructed him to give a fifth of everything he would earn for tzedakah and to distribute it among the poor people. This Reb Doiv was zeichet to be mekayim this throughout his entire life. He stuck to this through whatever financial situations he went through. He was always makbid to give 1/5 of whatever he earned to tzedakah. And it's brought that before he passed away, he once said that because of my chaimish, because I was zeichet to be strict in fulfilling Rabbi Arizal's instructions in this mitzvah of tzedakah, I have no fear at all whatsoever for the Bezdin Shel Mala. I'm not afraid at all of confronting the heavenly court and having them analyze what I did in this world, what I did that was right, what I did that was wrong. He said, Sevet mir noch arois kommen. I know that I'm going to come out ahead. Even with all the different things that I might have done during my life that were improper, that weren't so good, he had such a confidence in this mitzvah of giving a chaimish to tzedakah that he said, I know that when things are put on the scales, I'm definitely going to come out ahead. This Reb Doiv Zal was zeichet to become a kiruv to Rabbi Zal years before Rav Nosson Zal even. And it's interesting to note how he became a kiruv. This Reb Doiv Zal lived in a city called Dashiv, and there he had two very close friends that served as friends and rabbis to him. We know that in the Gemara there is the concept of a Talmud Chover. There's a concept of a student, somebody that's a student and friend together, whether it's based on the age or the closeness in knowledge of Torah, where one knows more than the other, but it's not necessarily that great a gap to be considered purely rabbi and student relationship. So sometimes we have this case of a Talmud Chover. This Reb Doiv Zal, at a certain point in time, after he got married, was being supported by his father-in-law to study Torah. And it came a certain time when he had to leave his father-in-law's table and go live in the city with his father, and to receive support and assistance from his father. His father, it turns out, lived in a small village that was close to Medvedevka, which was where Rabbeinu Zal was living at the time. When Rabbi Yudel Zal, his rabbi friend, found out that he was going to be leaving Dashiv, and he was going to have to move into the vicinity of where Rabbeinu Zal lived, he warned this Reb Dov Zal, make sure whatever you do, don't get involved with him. Don't get involved with them, Rabbi Nachman and his students. Because of the fact that this Reb Dov Zal was so close to Reb Yudel, and he respected him to such a degree, he took his advice very seriously, and he made sure to stay away. He ended up living there for a period of time, possibly a couple of years, and then it's brought that he fell into a very serious depression. He had a certain type of very serious suffering from a certain problem that he was going through, and as a result of that problem that he had, that's what forced him to meet Rabbeinu Zal. There's a posek in the Chumash where the posek says, "Batzar lecha umitzaucha," that when you're going to have pain and suffering, you're going to discover Hashem, v'shavtu ad Hashem alikecha. And the posek says over there, you'll be zeichet to do tshuva. And we find that there are many cases in the history of Klal Yisrael that there were people that weren't that religious, and what it took, the type of circumstance that it took for them to become religious or extra religious, was some type of problem, in certain cases, Rahman al-Islam, a catastrophe of some sort, and this item ends up being the thing that gives the person that push that they need to be brought close to Torah, to be brought close to tzadikim. In this case, it's brought in Chaim HaRan that this Reb Dov Zal and his wife had lived together for years, and they weren't zeicha to have children. And at one point in time, this Reb Dov Zal, because of the fact that he was so upset, he approached Rabbeinu Zal, asking him for help regarding this item. And Rabbeinu Zal said to him that what you need to do is you need to give tzedakah. By giving tzedakah, you'll be zeicha to have children. So Reb Dov Zal said to Rabbeinu Zal, what if I can't? What if I don't have what to give from? Could be this was referring to this period of time where he was being supported by his own father. So he wasn't in a position to give anything substantial to tzedakah. Rabbeinu Zal said to him, in that case, work on your emunah. Make sure to develop and strengthen your faith in Hashem, because emunah is also a form of tzedakah, a form of charity. We find that by Avraham Avinu, the Torah says, Vehe'emin b'Hashem, that Avraham Avinu was zeicha to have true faith in Hashem, vayachsheveho lo tzedakah, and Hashem considered it a form of tzedakah for Avraham Avinu, the fact that he had this pure faith in Hashem. Just as when a person gives tzedakah, that's a sign of emunah, it's a sign of trust. There's no way in the world that a person would be taking money out of his own pocket to give to somebody else if they didn't believe that this was going to benefit them in some way. Logically, rationally, it seems like a silly thing to do. If I have something, why should I take it away from myself and give it to somebody else, unless I really believe that the taking away is actually a form of giving to myself, that I'll actually benefit from this. So, it's brought that Reb Dov Zal did this. He did whatever was needed, and Rabbeinu Zal said to him at the time, and also we find that the word emunah, Aleph Mem Vov Nun Hey, is bigimatria bonim, exactly, bigimatria children. So Rabbeinu Zal said to him, work on this, and you'll see you'll be zeicha to children. And we find that this is exactly what happened. Reb Dov was misakin, whatever he needed to be misakin, and he was zeicha to have children after that. So it's brought that at this time, obviously, when he heard these words coming from Rabbeinu Zal, with the sincerity and with the Yiras Shamayim and with the emes that Rabbeinu Zal had, he suddenly felt that despite the advice that he had been given by his rabbi, Reb Yudel, to stay away from Rabbeinu Zal, he felt that this was the place to be. And from that point on, he attached himself to Rabbeinu Zal, and he became one of his close students. And it's brought that Rabbeinu Zal was especially careful with this Reb Dov Zal to watch his avodas Hashem, to give him instructions precisely as to how exactly what he should do, so that he shouldn't try to do more than he was able to and thereby get burnt, chas v'shalom. There are certain times that a person tries in religion to exceed their own level, to do more than what they're capable of doing, and as a result this could actually bring harm to a person. So it's brought that bedafka by this Talmud, Reb Dov Zal, Rabbeinu Zal was especially careful to tell him how far to go and not to go any further than that. A while after he became close to Rabbeinu Zal, a circumstance arose where he had to travel back to the city of Dashiv, to where his father-in-law lived and to where his former rabbi, Reb Yehuda, lived. And before he left Rabbeinu Zal, he asked him, what should I do if I'm confronted with this rabbi who I used to learn with? And he's the one who gave me specific instructions to stay away from you. What should I do when I see him? And Rabbeinu Zal warned him not to listen at all, that even if Reb Yehuda Zal would reprimand them harshly, to ignore it completely, period, not to be bothered by it at all whatsoever, because in fact he had done the best thing he possibly could for himself in attaching himself to Rabbeinu Zal. One of the interesting items that's brought about this Reb Dov Zal was that as many of Rabbeinu Zal's students at that time were makbid every single night to break the night, to break the sleep, whereas people consider it normal. One of the basic, simplest forms of pleasure in this world is to get a good night's sleep, which people assume to be 6 hours, 8 hours. People have all kinds of boundaries as to what that is. And it's brought that tzadikim, people that are very serious about serving Hashem, one of the choice avodas that they do is to take these 8 hours or 6 hours and break it right in the middle, right in the center of the night, to wake up, and rather than continuing to sleep, they use the second half of the night for learning Torah, for hispoidus, for davening, and in particular davening about the Churban Beis Hamikdash, crying over how bad we feel over the fact that we're not zeicha to have the Beis Hamikdash. It's brought that this Reb Dov Zal wanted very much to get up for Chatzos, and it seems that he had trouble waking up. So at one time, he instructed a goy, whether this was a servant or a neighbor, a goy that was in the area, to wake him up every single night. What happened was this worked for a period of time, but there were many times when the goy would wake him up, and then he would fall back asleep. Before he got a chance to pull himself together and get out of bed and start his avodah, he would fall back asleep, and he saw that this wasn't helping him either. So he decided to give the goy instructions not to leave until he was out of bed and completely dressed. And it's brought that this he did for a period of time, but this caused him bilbulim. It made him very nervous. He was always nervous before he went to go to sleep. What if the guy wouldn't show up? All the different possibilities. And this was mevalvel him, and it actually caused him to have headaches from this. And he suffered from this. After he met Rabbeinu Zal, his mother, Reb Dov Zal's mother, once approached Rabbeinu Zal and complained that she knows her son is suffering with headaches and other kinds of problems as a result of the fact that he doesn't sleep the full amount that he needs. So Rabbeinu Zal heard about this, and he saw that this was really true, that this Reb Dov Zal was being too extreme in trying to avoid the sleep. So Rabbeinu Zal said to him the famous words, Shlof un es nor hit the Zeit. A Jew is supposed to sleep, a Jew is supposed to eat, but watch the time. The main thing is not to waste time. A Jew isn't required to fast. A Jew isn't required not to sleep at all. You're entitled to do certain basic needs that the body has, but the time that you're awake and the time that you don't have to be eating, make sure you don't let that time slip out of your hands. Don't let it be wasted. The Meforshim bring that that's one of the ways that Jews are mekayim the avera of loy tirtzach. How does a Jew, a religious Jew, commit murder? Murder is when a person takes 15 minutes of their own that they could be using to learn Chumash and Rashi, to learn Mishnayos, to say Tehillim, to come to shul earlier, and the person takes that time and wastes it. Killing time is actually an act of murder. Who are you murdering? yourself. You actually shortened your life by 15 minutes. The fact that those 15 minutes could have been used to serve Hashem and they weren't, it means instead of living 73 years and 45 minutes, when the person passes away, they actually lived that amount and a half hour. Because those 15 minutes are not considered part of their life, chas v'shalom. And Rabbi Arizal said to this Reb Dov, take this advice that I gave you seriously and think it over and try to apply it, and then come back to me in a while and you'll ask me exactly how this applies to you. This Reb Dov Zal did, and Rabbi Arizal said to him that I want you to know that for you, your chatzos will not be like everybody else. For everybody else, their chatzos is approximately 12 o'clock midnight, depending on winter or summer. For you, your chatzos will be 3 a.m. That's the time for you to get up. You're not supposed to get up earlier than that. And this Reb Dov Zal took seriously, even though the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara and the Zohar Kodesh speak about how fantastic a mitzvah it is for a person to get up at chatzos, at midnight. He understood that to follow his rabbi's advice, that the one that was in a position to teach him what his avodah of chatzos was only his own personal rabbi. And he followed Rabbi Arizal's advice in this. And it's brought that the people in the Beis Medrash in Shigrin used to know when they saw him walking into the shul early in the morning, everybody knew now it's 3 a.m. You were able to tell like a clock. That's how serious he followed the advice of Rabbi Arizal. Rabbi Arizal once commented about this Reb Dov that his Yerushalmi is so serious, like a person is afraid in those days. If a person was caught stealing or doing other types of criminal acts, they would flog the person in the middle of the street. They would take the person, lay him down over a board, and whip the person. 100 lashes, 300 lashes, the kind of punishment where a person wouldn't be able to walk for a few weeks after that from the severe pain. Rabbi Arizal said that this Reb Dov is afraid of Hashem like a person feels the fear when they're placed before the Russischen zu schmeißen, when the Russian lays them out on the table to give them this type of whipping. The kind of fear that grips people at that moment, that's the kind of Yerushalmi this Reb Dov had 24 hours a day. Now, we said earlier that this Reb Yudel Zal had instructed him to stay away from Rabbi Nachman, to stay away from Rabbi Arizal. However, we said that Reb Dov Zal ended up not following that advice and coming close to Rabbi Arizal. Then when he came back to the city of Dashiv, when Reb Yudel found out what had happened to him, and he saw the kind of changes it affected in his life, he saw that this Reb Dov was no longer the same person. He watched his davening, and he saw that his davening was much, much better than it had ever been before he met Rabbi Arizal. And he watched his learning, and he watched his frumkeit in general, and he noticed a very major change from when this Reb Dov had left him and met up with Rabbi Arizal to this period of time. And because of the sincerity and the honesty of these tzadikim at that time, Reb Yudel, rather than getting angry at him for the fact that he hadn't followed his advice, Reb Yudel expressed an interest and a curiosity. He asked Reb Dov to please tell him stories about Rabbi Arizal. Tell me about this tzadik that affected such a change to your life. This Reb Dov did, and then this Reb Yudel, who was his rabbi, plus one of his close friends, Reb Shmuel Isaac Zal, decided, based on what they heard, that they wanted to go meet this rabbi themselves. If he was able to have such a significant effect on their student to make him so much more religious, they wanted to see if they could benefit by it too. Now, because of the fact that they were very poor at the time and couldn't afford to make this trip by wagon or by any other means of travel, the distance from Dashiv, where they lived, to Medvedevka, where Rabbi Arizal lived, was a distance of about 200 miles. They ended up deciding to walk together, Reb Yudel Zal and Reb Shmuel Isaac Zal, to walk from Dashiv to Medvedevka to meet this tzaddik. This they did, and on the way, one of the cities that they passed was the city of Trovitz, one of the famous cities in Russia at the time, and there they met a few other people in the city, and they got them to come along with them. And this group of people walked together a few hundred miles to meet Rabbeinu Zal. This was obviously not done over a period of days. This is the sincerity and the seriousness that rabbis had in that time in wanting to grow. Now we come to the story, the incident in Rabbi Yutal's life that's mentioned here in the place in Sichos HaRan that we're up to right now. This Rabbi Yutal, it's brought, was a major Talmud Chacham, and he was highly respected in the city of Dashiv where he lived. He was the son-in-law of Reb Leib Mistretenitz, who was one of the Baal Shem Tov's Talmidim. And if we say one of the Baal Shem Tov's Talmidim, obviously you could imagine what level of greatness we're talking about in knowledge of Torah, in Tzidkis. And his father-in-law, this Reb Leib Mistretenitz, had taught him the Kisvei Arizal. So that Rabbi Yutal Zal, besides being knowledgeable in Gemara, in Halacha, he also had this knowledge of secrets of Kabbalah also. When he came to Rabbeinu Zal, after having walked 200 miles to meet this tzadik, when he came to him, his words to Rabbeinu Zal in meeting him were, Yoirenu Rabbeinu derech la'avodas haboyri yisborach. Will our rabbi please teach us a path of how to come very close to Hashem? When Rabbeinu Zal heard these words, he felt that this was being spoken. This is not how a student comes to a rabbi. When a student comes to a rabbi to ask a question, or if he really wants the rabbi to bring him close to Hashem, we learned recently that it's brought in Oisios to Rabbi Akiva that Yehoshua, who was Moshe Rabbeinu's closest student, when he presented himself before his rabbi, he presented himself as a ksil, as a fool. He acted as if he knew nothing, as if he was a 3-year-old kid coming to ask a question. He wasn't coming with an arrogance, with a firmness, like a person who knows almost everything else there is to need to know. He's just got 2 or 3 questions a month or a year that he checks in with his rabbi just to sort of clean up his act, just to add a little bit of spice to all the tons of knowledge that he has on his own. So when Rabbeinu Zal heard him speaking in this way, this is after showing such sincerity and such humbleness in walking 200 miles to come to see this rabbi. Rabbeinu Zal said to him, Lodas ba'oretz darkecha? There's a posek in Tehillim that says that Hashem lets His wisdom be known in the lowest part of the earth. So Rabbeinu Zal said this as a question to Rabbi Yutal Zal. Do you want me to present my wisdom ba'oretz? In other words, implying that you're on such a low level and you're asking about a derech la'avodas Hashem, you're using these fancy words. You want to know that's all that you're missing now. Everything else, you know everything there is to know. You just want to know what's the exact derech to come close to Hashem. Implying that the question wasn't being asked with the right humbleness. And it's brought that when Rabbeinu Zal said this, he looked at him in a certain way where this Rabbi Yutal Zal was shattered with pachad, fear. He suddenly felt an overwhelming awe and fear standing in the presence of Rabbeinu Zal, to such a point where he jumped back, like a person sees a lion or sees something that's unbelievably overwhelming. He jumped back away from Rabbeinu Zal to the door of the room through which he had entered. Right after that, Rabbeinu Zal walked over to him and said to him, what are you afraid of? I don't see what you're so overawed about. There isn't that much of a difference between you and me, other than the fact that I'm a bit smarter than you. That's all. And Rabbeinu Zal started talking to him and being mekar of him, showing him friendliness and warmth. And then a second time, suddenly, Rabbeinu Zal placed this pachad on him, where again suddenly he felt himself overwhelmed with fear, and again he jumped away from Rabbeinu Zal, headed for the door to get out. That's the kind of panic that suddenly filled him. And a second time Rabbeinu Zal went over to him and said, what, are you afraid of me? Again, there's no big difference between you and me, just that I'm a bit smarter than you. And this happened a third time, and after the third time, Rabbeinu Zal finally hinted to this Rabbi Yutal Zal that what he needs to do now is to be misvadeh. He needs to confess his sins before Rabbeinu Zal. There was a short period of time during Rabbeinu Zal's lifetime where he allowed his Talmidim to come before him and to do a confession, to actually confess their sins. There is a chapter in Likutei Moharan, Torah Dalid, where Rabbeinu Zal explains in detail, showing from Psukim in Tanakh, how a Chacham, a Talmud Chacham, has the power to be mechaper avonos. Just as the Gemara says that one of the main functions of the Kohen Gadol was to be mechaper al bnei Yisrael, v'chiper ba'adoi uvad beisoi bad kol kal Yisrael, we know that the Novi says that a Talmud Chacham is considered on a much higher level than a Kohen Gadol. So if the Kohen Gadol can do that, certainly the Talmud Chacham can do it. And Rabbeinu Zal quotes a posek, Chamas Melech Malachei Moves, that when a Jew commits a sin or many sins, this arouses the anger of Hashem. And this anger quite often is reflected in Malach HaMoves, in an angel of death, coming to either kill the person or chas v'shalom inflict pain and suffering. And the pasuk finishes by saying, Ve'ish chacham yichaprena. But a Talmud Chacham has the power to forgive, has the power to remove those forces of the Malachei Moves who normally punish for sins. A Talmud Chacham has the power to save a person from that. So Rabbeinu Zal hinted to Rabbi Zal to be misvadeh. This he did. And from that point on, there was formed a very serious kesher between them. This Rabbi Zal became one of Rabbeinu Zal's close students. And he grew in Torah, in Tefillah, in Teshuva, in Ma'asim Tovim. And he was also one of the people in that generation who was zecher to be mechadesh in Torah, to bring new revelations of Torah into the world. It's interesting to note that before Rabbeinu Zal made his trip to Eretz Yisrael, Rabbeinu Zal asked Rabbi Yudel to give him a bracha. Rabbeinu Zal received a bracha from Rabbi Yudel. So again, you have to know we're talking about a great tzadik and Talmud Chacham who came to Rabbeinu Zal to be brought closer to Hashem. One of the interesting, striking stories in terms of the closeness that Rabbi Yudel Zal had to his rabbi, Rabbi Yudel Zal once asked Rabbeinu Zal, please show me a miracle. I'd love to see a miracle. Rabbeinu Zal said to him, fine, stay here. This was obviously right before Shabbos. And Rabbeinu Zal said to Rabbi Yudel Zal, stay with me over Shabbos, and I'll show you something. Obviously, very excited, Rabbi Yudel Zal decided to stay. And Rabbeinu Zal said to him during Shabbos that there's a village close by where there's a person that lives there that's close to me, one of my Talmidim. This person was living for a long time married, without children, and he came to me many times asking me to arouse Rachmanis by Hashem to try to see what I could do to help him. At one point in time, I promised him that he's going to have a son. However, I made a condition with him. I said to him that every single time that 6 months go by, once every half a year, he must bring me a rendel, a certain coin for tzedakah, $1, a $10 bill, once every half a year. This was the deal I made in order for him to be able to have children. Rabbeinu Zal said this person followed my instructions, and his wife was zecher to have a baby boy. And Rabbeinu Zal said to Rabbi Yudel Zal, this happened a while ago, and up till today, this student has been following my instructions to the T. Like clockwork, I know the exact day that he's going to be coming every single 6 months to bring me this rendel. However, Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, is the day when he's supposed to come to bring me the rendel, and I know that he's not going to come. He's not going to fulfill his word. He gave his word that he's going to do this. He's not going to fulfill his word because of the fact that his brother-in-law is putting on pressure on him to talk him out of this. The brother-in-law tells him, how do you know it's not him that did it? Because when you wanted to have children, I also went to other tzaddikim, and I gave them money for a pidyon, and I asked them also to pray for you and your wife. So who are you to say that Rabbi Nachman is the one that did it for you? And the brother-in-law has been working on him for a while to talk him out of this. And I know that he's just achieved success. I know that this Talmud has decided that he's not going to come. And Rabbi Arizal said to Rabbi Yudel, you're going to see that instead of the rendel that he's supposed to bring me, he's going to bring me his son dead, Rachmana litzlan. And v'chein havo mamish kedivrei Admor Zatzal. That was exactly what happened on Tuesday. This student came. We don't have to describe the frame of mind he came in. And he came and brought this child to Rabbi Arizal. We know that it's brought in the Gemara. The Gemara says in Nedorim, ba'avoin Nedorim, that specifically when it comes to this item, tzedakah, if a person makes a pledge for tzedakah and they don't keep it, Rachmana litzlan, this is something that could cause this type of punishment, chas v'shalom. Rav Nosson Zal adds here that it seems that Rabbi Arizal understood that because this child had been born, in a sense, through a type of miracle, it took an extra effort to bring this child into the world. Because of that, Rabbi Arizal understood that he had to do a special hamtokas adinim for this child in this form. Twice a year, there had to be a pidyon of this magnitude to keep this child alive. And as soon as this item was stopped, Rachmana litzlan, immediately the dinim took over, and that's what caused chas v'shalom this tragedy. That's one miracle that Rabbi Yudel Zal was privileged to see. Again, this same Talmud, Rabbi Yudel, there was once an incident that Rabbi Zal was having a discussion with people in the shul about a certain pshat in Gemara. They were discussing a certain Gemara, and we know that quite often it's possible even for learned people to have a difference of opinion as to exactly what the Gemara means to say. Rabbi Zal held one way, and there were a group of people that felt respectfully that they disagreed with the interpretation of the Gemara. Those people said, let Rabbi Yudel be the one to decide who's right. Now, obviously he had just come into the shul possibly, and this controversy was going on strong, and they said, let's see who he's going to say is right. Rabbi Yudel Zal heard both sides, and obviously with respect, he said it seems to him, he also thought that the pshat in the Gemara is the way those other people were saying. Rabbi Zal said to him, what if I prove to you that I'm right? Will you let me lay you down on the table and give you a whipping? So Rabbi Zal said, sure, no problem. Rabbi Zal proceeded to explain the Gemara and to show all of them very clearly where their mistake was. And then after he finished, he said, okay, come here. And he lay this Rabbi Zal on, he had him lay down on the table, and he had somebody give him schmitz, give him petch. This is a Talmud Chacham, a person who was knowledgeable in Sifrei Kabbalah, a Talmud of Reb Leib Misretenitz, and at the time that Rabbi Zal received the petch, he had a chalisha sadas, and he was maharher. He had a bad thought against Rabbi Zal, because he felt that Rabbi Zal was doing the wrong thing in putting him through this shame and this pain and suffering. Afterwards he went home. Rabbi Zal went back to his house, and he found that his daughter was very ill. And he immediately came to Rabbi Zal to tell Rabbi Zal about this problem in his family. Rabbi Zal proceeded to tell him about a story that there was once a mill that was used to grind tvua in the city of Danzig, the city that the Chayodim came from. And this mill was run on 24 stones. And it seems that some kind of a spirit, a dibuk, a shed of some sort, got into that mill and wasn't allowing the mill to function. It wasn't working. No matter what they tried to do to get this mill to work, they couldn't get it to work. And they found out, a magician at the time instructed them that by taking one of the 24 stones that we used to work that mill, taking it out and grinding it up to dust, they would find that the mill would function perfectly after that. This they did, and they found that the mill was okay. This is what Rabbi Zal told Rabbi Yudel Zal, and he explained to him that this was a hint related to his daughter. We know the Gemara says that there are Chof Dalid Roshei Evorim. There are 24 major organs of the body, including the fingers, different parts of the body that are included within these Chof Dalid Roshei Evorim. And Rabbi Zal was implying that because of the fact that Rabbi Yudel was maharher at the time that he got this whipping, because of the fact that he thought badly against his rabbi, as a result of that, his daughter would have to forfeit one of these chof daled evorim. And sure enough, Rav Nosson writes that afterwards, what happened was a finger on one of her hands